because regardless of whether you are the people getting hurt or the people who are aggravated about the help not showing up, just it's not good energy regardless.
That's right. The dynamic of the energy, there is a very positive dynamic that's going on here. It's a dynamic of that heartfelt compassion, and is very much a dynamic of a heart-centered energy. Part of the problem is that in the dynamics of your world, in order for you to really begin to understand it and appreciate it, it needs to come through the lens of some sort of religious dynamic, of some sort of dynamic that is accountable, that is accountable beyond the human morality, a dynamic of a human compass, a moral compass. In other words, that you need, instead of being able to rely on that spark of the divine, that spark of God, Goddess, all that is, that exists within each and every one of you, instead of having that personal relationship with God, because then if you do, then in fact you automatically know that you are good enough, that you are in fact more, what shall we say, responsible for the actual reality that you as an individual are creating. If you're in that dynamic of heart-centeredness in that sort of way, all of that other dynamic just kind of falls away, and you're not adding to that, because right now, what's the one thing that you could easily fall into? You could easily fall into a dynamic of outrage, right? You could be outraged at the dynamic. Well, what are you outraged at? Are you outraged because the aliens haven't come down and saved you? Are you outraged because government hasn't come in and saved you in a circumstance where, you're relying on them for dynamics? As Shell said, you're relying on them for dynamics of self, that one can easily begin to move into. But again, in the midst of that whole dynamic of separation, oh, here we go, of separation is that whole dynamic of unity, is that whole dynamic of connection. So you've got the dynamic of unity on the one hand, and you have the dynamic of separation on the other hand. The dynamic of unity comes from a dynamic of love. The dynamic of separation comes from a dynamic of
fear.
Fear. Fear. Well, fear is an interesting trinity, is it not?
Trinity?
Trinity, yes, it's a trinity. Fear. Think about it. A fear about anything that you have. First thing it causes is separation. It destroys the dynamic of unity. Fear moves you into that dynamic of separation. The second thing it does, it creates a division. It creates a dynamic of you and them, or you or them and us. And the third thing it does is it causes a dynamic of constriction, where it actually constricts your life energy. Fear is the lowest vibration that you can experience in this reality. Energetically, frequency-wise, it is the lowest, the densest, the most difficult energy that there is. Everything else is a higher frequency. Word.
I mean, as you were saying with the heart center, you can do so much more good when you're in that,
But again, it's not a dynamic of an either or, isn't it? In this situation of the reality that you exist within, how many, if we're looking at the dynamic, because we're looking at the dynamic, hello, Barry. If we're looking at the dynamic, we're looking at the dynamic of fear. if we're looking at that dynamic and we're looking at it in the realization that it does everything necessary to keep you all in the dynamic of adding to the loosh, adding to that dynamic of negative energy, because you are, you can never really move completely into love. First of all, you don't completely trust it. But then there is that whole dynamic of that seems to be the place that you have to deal with, those dynamics that you have to deal with in order to be able to move forward. And that's just basically the way that this reality exists in that sort of way. And if you accept that dynamic, of movement, if you can become intimate with your fear.
Oi.
Oh, really? That was great.
But it's the truth, because that's the only way to deal with your fear. You need to really look at it. We used to describe it as a dynamic. Oh, well, face your fear, dive into it, amp it up, feel that. Well, that's absolutely. But ultimately, you need to know why you're afraid. Why do you feel weak in these certain areas? Why do you not trust yourself? Why do you not trust others? And come to a dynamic of, what's the word? Resolution within that. In other words, become comfortable with your fear. Know your fear. Accept your fear. And as you accept the dynamic of your fear, you will find out that it no longer controls you. But again, because it's a dynamic of fear, it's a real emotional, energetic dynamic. And so if you examine that dynamic and you become intimate with that dynamic, it ceases to have its power over you. And we know that sounds very abstract, especially when there is this much fear being generated in the reflections of your realities. But we would ask each and every one of you, how many of you are actually having to face with the dynamics of the levels of fear that are reflected in the dynamics of your reality? And we would say none of you. We would say none of you. So there is certainly that dynamic of concern. There is certainly the energy of compassion, the energy of understanding. That there's also the understanding of the reflections of the bigger picture that are going on in your world right now. At the same time as there is an incredible split in the dynamics of the masculine and the feminine, in the dynamics of the political, in the dynamics of so much of your reality, at the very same time, if you look at the dynamics of what has happened with Helene, isn't it interesting that Helene is the channel's second ex-wife? Just a little coincidence, and that ex-wife just destroyed Adrian's old hometown. Not that there's any coincidences or anything, but dynamics have meaning for people in their own sort of way. So, to make the point that we were wishing to make, the big thing here is the understanding that the true nature of humanity is shining through. And it is that dynamic of neighbor helping neighbor, stranger helping stranger, transcending the dynamics of division, transcending the dynamics of separation, transcending the dynamics of constriction and moving to love and moving to unity. And you, each of you, have that spark of love, that spark of compassion within you. And all you need to do is begin to activate it more. All right.